Hello and welcome to the 28storms.com Tropical Storm Emily update as of Wednesday afternoon on this August 3rd. Emily is still no more than a minimal to moderate tropical storm with maximum sustained winds of 50 miles per hour. Emily is still forecast to begin making its way over Hispaniola later tonight and into tomorrow morning, but that track in the short term has been shifted ever so gradually off toward the west because we've yet to really see it turn more toward the north in the latest movement. It's still moving off toward the west at 14 miles per hour, and the track still takes this over much of the Bahamas, and it keeps it fairly close to the eastern half of Florida, and much of the state is still within the cone of error, along with some extreme coastal portions of Georgia and the Carolinas. And then finally by 8 a.m. on Monday, Emily is forecast to become a minimal hurricane as it begins to head on off to sea. Today's model consensus still insists that this storm will make a sharp right turn before reaching Florida, but there is still enough model variance to still not completely rule out Florida facing some direct impacts from this particular storm. As you can see, even the BAM models are still trying to push this into the southeast Gulf of Mexico. Despite Emily not having made any turn toward the north in the last 24 hours, we still feel as though a northerly transition will begin fairly soon. We're looking at the lowest level steering of the atmosphere, and between the two ridges, the one over the northeast Atlantic and the other one over Texas and Louisiana, we still have a low-level trough here across much of the Bahamas. So even though the system is remaining a little bit weaker than expected, that trough still exists even in the lowest layers of the atmosphere, which should act to draw the system northward, even if it's just a minimal tropical storm. The latest visible animation confirms that the center of circulation is still vastly exposed, with much of the convective activity remaining off toward the east and south of the circulation. And in the last couple frames, it looks like we may begin to see a bit of a northerly component, although it's a little bit harder to tell here, with some convection trying to make its way back over the center just to the south of the Dominican Republic. But once again, the official forecast takes it directly over Hispaniola. Whether it makes that turn that quickly remains to be seen. There's an outside chance that it waits until it makes it between Hispaniola and Cuba, and that would be a bit of a saving grace in terms of the storm's intensity, because that circulation would remain more so over water than the very high terrain of Hispaniola. If we observe Emily from a more regional perspective, we can still make out where the low-level circulation is. The center is still outrunning much of the convection, still displaced to the south and east. You can also see this on the latest infrared. And the reason why this storm continues to remain so lopsided and is struggling to intensify is because we still have this upper-level trough parked over much of the central and western Atlantic, and the storm is simply just too close to this trough at the moment. Now, several of the model guidance does take a part of this trough more so toward the west into the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and eventually we could be seeing an upper low here over the southeast Gulf, which would happen to increase the upper level ridging over the Bahamas once the storm begins to make it that far north, which could induce a bit more favorable conditions. But again, it's going to greatly depend on what the structure is of this system once it crosses Hispaniola. Obviously, if the storm is rather disorganized and it really has no remaining structure left, then it won't be able to fully take advantage of those slightly more favorable conditions. Now, despite my latest thinking, anyone still within the official cone of error should still be preparing for tropical storm or even minimal hurricane force conditions. As you know, it's always best to be on the safe side, and that cone is there for a reason. It does denote the average error during those medium range times. But still, overall, my thinking is that this will remain just off of Florida as long as it remains a legit tropical cyclone. Here we are looking at the 500 millibar pattern. The storm is correctly diagnosed here to the south of the Dominican Republic. There's the mid-level trough. It does begin to temporarily lift out while the western Atlantic ridge begins to build back toward Florida. But notice here, by late Thursday night into Friday morning, we have a fairly strong shortwave trough over northern Missouri. This trough is just a little bit deeper than it was in prior runs, which gives me a little bit added confidence that this pattern will remain in place, or at least the forecast pattern won't change. And as we go into Saturday night into Sunday morning, that shortwave trough has now made it over the Appalachians and the Carolinas, just in the nick of time, because our tropical storm is just to the east of Miami, Florida, and this trough should still be strong enough to quickly turn this right before it makes it into the Sunshine State. The alternative scenario, advertised by the CMC model, indicates that if tropical storm Emily were to remain very weak or even dissipate into an open wave axis, then it will be steered more by the extreme low-level 850 millibar steering pattern, and although the trough does exist as far as 850 millibars, it is slightly weaker while the ridging across the Bahamas is a bit stronger. And if we go ahead and advance this frame, we see that it takes the 850 millibar vorticity max of Tropical Storm Emily, or at least the remnants of Emily, into the Florida Keys and eventually into the southern half of the Florida Peninsula before much more of a northern track begins to take place, and then eventually it recurves sharply out to sea east of the Georgia coastline. Quite frankly, I think that we should all hope that the CMC verifies, as we know Florida needs the rainfall, so who wouldn't take a minimal tropical depression or an open wave axis to give us some much needed rain? The 12Z ECMWF is much like the 12Z GFS. There's the location of our tropical storm located just to the south of Hispaniola. For everyone in Florida, this is Miami. Daytona Beach is further up here, and here's the Carolinas. As we go into day 1, 2, and 3, we see that the vorticity max is located very close to Miami, Florida, only about less than 200 miles off the coastline. By day 4, it's beginning to move more toward the north, however. As we see, there is a fairly strong trough of low pressure across much of the mid-Atlantic states, and then by day 5, we can't even really recognize where the storm is, as it's been absorbed by a much more significant non-tropical system. So despite Tropical Storm Emily taking a bit more of a western course than expected over the last 24 hours, I don't really think that will fully change the end result. I still see Tropical Storm Emily making it just to the east of the Florida Peninsula, despite making a very close approach, but this should only make the turn out to sea a bit sharper here, since that trough is still expected to be sweeping through at around the same time period. That much hasn't really changed in the forecast model guidance. And simply put, if it does in fact make its way over the Florida Peninsula, I think that would be a very strong indication that we're dealing with an even weaker system than we currently anticipate by that time period. More than likely a tropical depression or open wave axis if that were the case. And like I said, hopefully that does happen. Florida does need the rain, they just don't need a tropical cyclone. So that's your update this afternoon. Please check by again at 28storms.com for the latest information. We will continue to cover Emily all throughout its life cycle, and then we will continue to cover the tropics through the remainder of hurricane season 2011. We have a long way to go. We're not even anywhere close to the peak just yet, so hopefully you can find us informative as we make it through these summer months. So thanks again, and have a good afternoon.